Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. So I'm Nico. I'm currently working for the tiny yet mighty Tidal Collective that I've co-founded with two other friends and former colleagues from 350, where I've worked for the past 10 years. And I wanted to share this message about movement cycles. Um, so, might start with a very simple yet heavy question. How close are we to winning? Are we actually close to winning? Aren't we losing ground? Are we doing the right thing right now when it comes to tactics, strategies, organizing, mobilizations, campaigns, actions? Or are we doing things just because we've done them before and they seem to work? So, even if they don't work now, we are doing them because we're waiting that the context is changing so that they work again. So aren't we, just in the reproduction of things that we've done in the past because we don't know what else to do. And yeah, clearly these are tough questions, especially in these tough times. Yet these questions are also decisive questions, ones that everyone who's ever been involved in a campaign or a project that is ambitioning to change the course of things, to transform business as usual, has been confronted to. So, spoiler alert, there is no recipe. There is no one size fits all answer. No, these things work whatever the context is. So, let's do that over and over again until we win. There is no magic wand. And of course, this could add to our deep sense of powerlessness, to this feeling that whatever we do, this is not good enough, this is not accurate, that we are responsible in the first place for this situation. The global context, the fact that we didn't manage to stop the fossil fuel industry at this stage, to contain the rise of the right wing, to create the conditions for peace, equality, and democracy for all. Wouldn't be this our responsibility, our fault? Take climate. After all, there were 7 million of us in the streets everywhere at the end of September 2019. It was one of the largest mobilization ever. And everyone that was involved in building this mobilization or in joining a protest was like convinced in their flesh that this was just the beginning, that this was not the peak of the mobilization, that we would go further, and that eventually we would trigger the change that we need, that there would be more of us joining. We were committed to continue, to never ever stop until the world would have achieved what we wanted. September 2023, September 2024, September 2025, we were happy and celebrating the fact that a couple hundred of thousands of people joined climate-related protests. So at least 70 times less than September 2019. Did the global context change? The objective reasons to mobilize? Obviously not, right? Climate change has gotten worse. We are getting closer to deep catastrophes and chaos. So there are even more reasons in 2025 than in 2019 to mobilize. Yet there were 70 times less people, fewer people, probably actually even 100 fewer, people, 100 times fewer people than in 2019. And yeah, again, there are no less reasons to mobilize, to be angry, to be anxious, to be upset, or to be calling for system change in 2025 than in 2019. So it's tempting, to say that this is our fault, this is our responsibility, yours as much as mine. And you can see that actually in the newspapers, right? The newspaper and analysts who were praising Greta and Fridays for Future have started to blame them and put, the responsibility on them that they went, too far into intersectionality, or too far into Palestine solidarity, or too far into, criticizing capitalism, and that because of that, the solidarity and the base of the movement shrank. Um, so, yeah, I mean, and sometimes actually that critique on our own responsibility comes from within the movement. How many podcasts, how many blogs, how many arguments can you have with people who are, your close allies, that are saying that, marching is useless, that whoever is marching and not doing something bolder is an accomplice of the system, rather than an ally who is trying to contribute to system change. So this is harsh, but this is also false, right? The reality is, you know, I don't know if it's simple or more complex, or if it's both, right? It's more simple and more complex at the same time. More simple, that's not our responsibility. Movements have ebbs and flows, cycles. Change isn't linear, which makes it a bit more complex, right? Because, this idea that history would be a line from the dark ages to emancipation through progress and development is a myth. But it's a myth that is deeply anchored in the left and in the activist and movement scene, right? So, yeah, let's be clear. History isn't linear, and that's not bad news. It is precisely because it has cycle, because it is to some extent unpredictable, that we have agency, that we have the possibility of having power to change the course of things. Because, I mean, if history was linear, actually our contribution to movement building, to organizing, to campaigning would be somewhat useless, because we would just follow the linearity of time. Let's put it differently. Cycles. So no movement, even the most successful ones, haven't gone through tough moments, haven't been carried away by the undertow, by exhaustion, by despair, by the feeling that we are losing. Sometimes actually at the very moment when we actually were close to winning. So take, the movement that is that is to you the most important in history, the one that you look at to seek inspiration, to seek ideas, to get pumped up, and convinced that it's worth mobilizing. It can be the civil rights movement. It can be the anti-abortion movement. It can be the decolonial movements from Latin America. It can be any movement that has been successful to some extent. And if you look carefully at the history of these movements, you will see obviously that there were many, many, many moments where the very actors of the change that this movement have triggered were just despaired and burnt out. So obviously, saying this and stopping there wouldn't be very helpful, right? So the idea is to, identify quite a few tools and approaches that can help one navigate these cycles. And I think this idea of movement cycles is at the core of the late Bill Moyers' work. Bill Moyer was a US-based Quaker who contributed to many campaigns on nuclear power and nuclear weapons. He also supported the feminist movements and many other, the civil rights movement and many other movements. And he realized that many times when he was talking to people after a successful mobilization that would even eventually prove 5 to 10 years later to have changed, the situation deeply, that these very people were really depressed, were convinced that they had failed. And so you will see, on his work that he's trying to identify the different cycles that a movement goes through and the role that trigger events play. So, this is a reminder that it's not on us, that the failure is not necessarily on us, that what's on us is actually to identify in which moment of the cycle, in which cycle we are, to identify what we need to do, what we need to change, what we need to adjust to fit the context and the cycle we're in. So it's also a call to be creative and to get reminded that being, an actor of change doesn't mean doing the same thing over and over again. There are moments where, marches are important. There are moments where petitions are important. There are moments where polarization can be actually a resource. There are moments where negotiations and seeking unity is important. There are moments where being angry and upset and showing it to the streets matters, and there are moments where actually what we need to show is a different affect. And the problem is, so that very often we are thinking how to overcome new challenges without realizing that there are new challenging. And so we are in Groundhog Day, we believe that we are facing the same thing ever and ever again. And so we are trying to do the same thing ever and ever again. And so we're actually not failing. We're just facing a new context, a new cycle, but we don't always realize that. So yeah, that's what Bill Moyers has shown. Movements have cycles. There are peaks, there are crevices, there are different types of road for every context. So think about it. Take the example of the one thing that drives you, the one campaign that you are involved in, that you feel bound to. Can you identify, a moment where there was a surge in the mobilization that you were part of? A moment where all of a sudden many people were coming that you were not expecting. Something that was really incredible, really appealing, and made you believe that, yeah, you were on the right track. Okay? Can you identify what was the trigger event and how you managed to harness that trigger event, that you were trying to make sure that it would help create momentum? Because the thing with trigger events is that they happen potentially all the time, and our role as organizers is not necessarily to create the conditions for trigger events to happen, but to create the condition for us to be able to harness or to seize a trigger event whenever it happens. So climate change again, and the climate movement. A trigger event can be, a moment where a young teenager from Sweden decides to skip school every Friday, and then there is some, not virality, right? Because it lasted actually quite a few months before it was taken, over by others. But at some point, it resonates with people's affects, and it becomes the largest movement on climate change that we've witnessed in the past. A trigger event can be a moment where a black woman decides to sit on a bus because she's just exhausted on a part of a bus that is supposed to be for white people only, and she is then kicked out of the bus, and it triggers a big mobilization. Well, that mobilization did not, fall from the sky. It was prepared. It was to some extent actually even staged, right? The Rosa Parks thing in the bus. So that's the role, that we have to prepare trigger events or to anticipate the fact that they might come, they might occur at some point, and that we need to have the movement infrastructure in place, the campaign plan in place to get things rolling whenever they happen. Okay, so think about your example. What made the movement peak? Because often, there is a surge in mobilization, and at some point you reach a peak. What are the things that prevented you from going further? Is it because people were burnt out? Is it because people were exhausted? Is it because the attention shifted? Is it because your target or the institution that you were trying to negotiate with started to open, a new avenue for conversation? Is it because of repression? Is it because people moved on to something else? There are many reasons why a peak can happen. And then did you, manage to adjust your strategy, your narrative, like, again, climate change, climate justice. We've been saying for many, many years, many, many COPs. Like, I started to be involved in the climate justice movement in 2008, right before the COP 15 in Copenhagen. The COP in Copenhagen was presented as, the moment where humanity and world leaders could save the world for the last time, you know. And we've been saying that, this is the last time we really have the possibility to make impact. This is the moment. Many, many times. And we keep on repeating that. And when you say this is the moment, well, it also, it implies two things. First, if change doesn't happen when it is the moment, well, then it will never happen. And the second thing is, if it doesn't happen in a context that was the moment, then it's on us. And again, that is false. What we are failing to do is to adjust to the moment, right? And so Bill Moyer is just like, showing that a movement goes through a trigger event, a first peak, then there is a plateau or even, a moment where the mobilization decreases, and there will be a second trigger event at some point that we need to prepare for, and there will be another peak, and eventually there will be change. And throughout these cycles, the roles of the change makers changes. There are moments where we need, the people who are, able to mobilize people. So yeah, again, as I said, people who can work on effects of anger, anxiety, urgency. But there are also moments where what you will need is people who are rather good to speak to a wider audience and to reassure them, to tell them that the change that is going to happen is going to be, benefit all. There are moments where what you need is brokers, people who can talk to the institution while keeping a foot in the movement. So, a variety of options. And um, and that's basically, the message from Bill Moyer's work. And then one way to translate it into reality or into something more concrete is to look at another powerful tool, which is a spectrum of allies. So, that's the idea to look at the people that surround you, society, not only as two very monolithic block, where there would be, your supporters and your opponents, where there would be, say, you are fighting to defend same-sex marriage, and there would be people who support you, and there would be people who are against you, and the idea is to just shift the needle in that polarization to have enough people supporting you, like 50% of the population plus one person, and then you eventually will win. Well, the idea is to look at it in a way that is a bit more nuanced and to look at, active opponents. So the people who are actually mobilizing on the opposite agenda, who are trying to push society to refuse same-sex marriage. Then you have the passive opponents. So these are the people who, read the newspapers and like would probably vote at some point for people who are against same-sex marriage, but they will not necessarily join a protest. They will not necessarily, support actively the mobilization. Then at the center you have the people who are neutral. They don't know about the issue. They don't have strong opinions about the issue. They could, lean towards opposition or support, depending on who wins the argument, who is the most convincing. Then, further on the left, you would have the passive supporters. So the people who, like support the very idea of same marriage, who would support candidates, you know, working on this and defending this agenda or such a platform, but who would not be active in the mobilization. And then you have the active supporters. Um, and and so the idea is, to minimize the power and influence of the active opponents and to get more people to join, um, well, to turn to turn passive opponents into neutral people, to turn neutral people into passive supporters, and to turn passive supporters into active supporters. Now, the difficulty is that it's not the exact same activities, not the exact same, arguments that would change a, say, passive opponent into somebody who's neutral, and somebody who's a passive supporters into an active supporter, right? So you have to adjust your activities, you have to adjust your message, you have to think in terms of audiences and how you can shift some of them towards the left of the spectrum. And sometimes, you will win your campaign by prioritizing, like, passive supporters and turning them into active supporters. Sometimes the key to winning is actually just like, you know, shrinking the number of passive opponents and turning them into people who don't really care. And that's the key to winning. So, different activities, different tactics, different strategies in your campaign and mobilization, depending on the context and the time. Um, I'll stop here, but if helpful, can do a follow-up video or conversation with you all. Obviously, links in the description of the video, and I hope you will enjoy it.